Sergeant First Class Ryan Maddox slammed his hand on the briefing table so hard the coffee cups jumped. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I will not take orders from her." Every head in the room turned toward the woman standing at the front. Captain Emily Carter, 28 years old, 5'4", holding a mission file that could save 12 American lives. Maddox pointed directly at her. "She's going to get us all killed." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. And Emily Carter just looked at him, calm, quiet, unblinking, like she had already seen this moment coming from miles away. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along with us all the way to the end, and drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from, because I want to see just how far this story has traveled. The morning it all began, Ryan Maddox was already in a bad mood. That was not unusual. Maddox operated at roughly 2 emotional settings: controlled aggression and barely controlled aggression, and most people on the base had learned to read the small differences between them. The way his jaw set when he was processing something he didn't like. The way his shoulders squared up before he said something he knew would land hard. The way he went quiet, dangerously quiet, in the seconds before he decided to make his opinion known. He was quiet now, standing in the hallway outside the mission briefing room at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, reading the single page that had been handed to him 20 minutes ago, reading it again and still not believing what was printed on it. Mission Planning Authority, Captain Emily A. Carter. He read it a third time, same result. Maddox had been in the Army for 14 years. He had served in 3 combat zones. He had pulled wounded men out of burning vehicles, made decisions in the dark with bullets cutting the air around him, and earned every decoration on his uniform through situations that would make most people's knees buckle. He was the kind of man other soldiers wanted beside them when things went wrong, and he knew it, and he had never once pretended otherwise. I was not the kind of man who second-guessed command decisions. Except this one. He folded the paper, tucked it into his vest pocket, walked into the briefing room, and saw her standing at the front of the space with her back to the door, writing coordinates on a whiteboard. She didn't hear him come in, or maybe she did, and chose not to react. Either way, Maddox stood there for a long moment and just looked at her. Captain Emily Carter. He had known her for 11 months. She had been attached to his unit as an intelligence specialist, the kind of role that meant she sat in rooms and analyzed data and produced reports that operators like Maddox sometimes read and sometimes didn't. She was small, maybe 5'4" on a generous day, with dark hair she kept pulled back in a braid so tight it seemed like it was holding her face together. She was quiet in a way that made some people uncomfortable, the kind of quiet that felt like it was watching you even when her eyes were pointed somewhere else. She had never been in a firefight. She had never commanded a field operation. She had never, as far as Maddox knew, done anything that required the particular combination of nerve and instinct that real combat demanded. And now somebody had put her in charge of extracting 12 American aid workers from one of the most dangerous territories in the world. "Carter," he said. She finished writing the coordinates, set down the marker, and turned around. "Maddox," she said, "you're early. Who made this decision?" She didn't flinch. She had known this was coming the same way she knew most things, through careful observation, through pattern recognition, through the simple logic that a man like Ryan Maddox would not read that piece of paper and walk calmly into the room. "Colonel Hargrove," she said, "it came from division." "Division," he repeated. The word came out flat and hard like a stone dropped on concrete. "That's correct." And nobody thought to ask whether that made any kind of operational sense. Emily picked up her coffee cup, took a sip, set it back down. "I imagine several people thought about it," she said, "and then division made the decision anyway." Maddox walked to the front of the room, not in an aggressive way exactly, but in the way of a man who was accustomed to occupying space and didn't see any reason to stop. He stopped about 6 feet from her and crossed his arms. "Let me be direct with you," he said. "You've never been anything else. This is a rescue mission. 12 civilians, hostile territory, active enemy presence. We are going in there and we are bringing those people home, and there is zero margin for the kind of mistake that comes from inexperience." Emily looked at him. "I agree with everything you just said." That caught him off balance for exactly half a second. He pushed through it. "Then you understand why this doesn't make sense. You're an intel specialist. You're good at what you do. I've read your assessments and they're solid. But planning a field extraction is a different animal entirely. Also true, she said. He uncrossed his arms. Then why aren't you objecting? Why aren't you going back to Hargrove and telling him to put someone in this seat who has actually run an operation? Emily set down the marker she'd been holding. She looked at Maddox for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted, not anger, not defensiveness, just a kind of steady, tired clarity. Because I have studied this target location for 6 weeks, she said. I know the enemy movement patterns. I know the terrain. I know every possible entry and exit point, including 3 that are not on any standard map. I know where our people are being held within a 40-foot radius based on communication intercepts that haven't been fully analyzed yet by anyone else on this base, she paused. Can you say the same? Maddox said nothing. Division didn't choose me because they think I'm the best fighter in this unit, Emily continued. They chose me because when it comes to this specific location, this specific mission, I have information nobody else has. And information, she said, is what keeps people alive. There was a long silence. Then Maddox said, when the bullets start flying, information doesn't mean a damn thing. I know, she said quietly. That's why I need you. He didn't expect that either. Before he could respond, the rest of the team began filing in through the door. 7 operators, all of them, experienced all of them, reading the same tension in the room, the way trained soldiers read every environment, automatically, unconsciously cataloging it before they even sat down. Sergeant Diego Ruiz came in first, nodded at Emily, found a seat. Ruiz was the kind of man who kept his opinions close and his observations closer. He'd worked with Emily twice before on intelligence operations, and whatever he thought of her, he kept it behind a face that gave away almost nothing. Corporal James Brickman, came in right behind him. 24 years old, built like his nickname, suggested loud in the way that young soldiers are loud when they haven't been frightened enough yet to learn the value of quiet. He saw the name on the whiteboard read. It looked at Maddox with an expression that asked a question. Maddox gave him nothing back. Sergeant Yolanda Pierce came in and took a seat next to Ruiz without a word. Pierce was the team's medic, one of the steadiest people Maddox had ever worked with, and the only member of the unit who had never in Maddox's memory said anything unkind about Emily Carter. Not because she was especially fond of her, but because Pierce's particular philosophy was that opinions were expensive and she preferred to spend them carefully. The rest of the team settled in. Emily turned back to the whiteboard. Thank you all for being here, she said. I know some of you have questions about the command structure for this operation. I'm not going to address those questions individually. What I'm going to do instead is show you why this mission requires a specific kind of planning, and then you can decide for yourselves whether the questions are worth asking. Maddox sat down. He pulled out a notepad. Whatever his feelings, he was a professional, and professionals paid attention. Emily began. She had been studying the target location for 6 weeks, and it showed. She did not read from notes. She spoke from memory, moving between the whiteboard and a series of photographs pinned to a corkboard to her left, walking the team through enemy position, estimates, guard rotation schedules, structural layouts, and a timeline of observed movement patterns that she had built by cross-referencing satellite imagery with communication intercepts with eyewitness accounts from 2 local sources whose identities she kept protected. It was, Maddox had to admit, somewhere in the back of his mind, the most thorough pre-mission briefing he had ever sat through. Primary entry, Emily said, tapping a point on the map. Through here. Secondary entry, and this is the one that matters, through here. She moved her finger 2 inches to the left. This access point doesn't appear on any military map of the area. It was a civilian maintenance route used by a local utility company that ceased operations 14 years ago. The access point is partially collapsed but navigable by a 4-person team moving single file. How do you know it's navigable? Brick asked. Because I had a local source confirm it on site 3 days ago. You had eyes on the ground 3 days ago and didn't tell us. I'm telling you now, Emily said. The source wasn't confirmed reliable until 48 hours ago. Brick looked at Maddox. Maddox was still writing. Emily moved to the next point. She walked them through the hostage location, a converted storage facility in the interior of a compound that from the outside looked like an unremarkable commercial property. She walked them through the guard structure, 16 active personnel, 2 roving sentries, a rotation schedule that created a 4-minute window between 9:40 and 9:44 p.m., during which the eastern perimeter would have reduced coverage. 4 minutes, Ruiz said, not quite a question. 4 minutes is enough, Emily said, if the team is positioned correctly. And if the rotation runs late, then we adapt. The secondary route adds 6 minutes to our timeline and requires us to pass through an additional interior corridor, but it gets us to the same position. She paused. I've built 3 contingency routes into this plan. Every one of them gets us to the hostages. The differences are in time and risk level. Pierce leaned forward. What's the risk spread between them? Primary route is lowest risk, requires the 4-minute window, and gets us out in approximately 30 minutes total. Secondary route is moderate risk, timeline extends to 40 minutes. Tertiary route is high risk, timeline extends to an hour plus, and we'd need to split the team at one point, which I want to avoid. Why, Maddox said, looking up from his notepad. Emily met his eyes. Because split teams in an enclosed compound with limited communication are the single most common factor in failed extractions. When you divide the group, you divide the information. Decisions get made in isolation. People act on incomplete pictures. Maddox wrote something down. His expression was unreadable. Questions so far, Emily said. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Brick said, I've got one. Go ahead. What happens if the intelligence is wrong? He said it without malice, genuinely curious, the way a young soldier asks the question he's been taught to ask. What if the guard rotation is different? What if the hostages have been moved? What's the plan when the plan breaks down? Emily looked at him for a moment. That's the best question in the room, she said. Brick blinked, apparently not having expected that. The answer is that the plan will break down, Emily said. Some part of it. I don't know which part, and I'm not going to pretend I do. What I can tell you is that every contingency route was built with broken intelligence in mind. They don't depend on the guard rotation. They don't depend on the hostages being in exactly this location, and they don't depend on anything I can't verify independently through at least 2 sources. She paused. What I need from every person in this room is the ability to make good decisions when the information changes. That's not something I can plan for. That's something you bring with you. She said the last sentence, looking at Maddox. He didn't look away. The briefing continued for another hour and 40 minutes. By the end of it, the room was quieter than it had been at the start. Not the uncomfortable quiet of before, when everyone was reading the tension between Maddox and Emily and wondering what it meant. This was a different kind of quiet, the kind that comes when people have been given something serious to think about and are thinking about it. When Emily dismissed them to begin equipment prep, Maddox stayed in his seat. He waited until the room was empty. Then he said, Carter. She was already stacking her files. She looked up. I still think this is the wrong call, he said. Command structure-wise, I want that on record. Noted, she said. But, he paused. He looked like a man choosing his next words with great care. That secondary access point, the utility route, how confident are you in that 92%? Based on on-site confirmation cross-referenced with structural surveys from the original construction cross-referenced with a drainage map from the utility company's records that took me 3 weeks to find. She paused. 92% is as confident as I get. Maddox was quiet for a moment. What's the other 8%, he asked. That the structure has deteriorated more than the survey suggests and we lose navigability in the back section. And if that happens, then we go to the tertiary route, and I've already pre-planned exactly how to split the team to minimize risk. He stood up. You pre-planned for your own backup plan failing. I plan for everything failing, Emily said. That's my job. He picked up his notepad and walked toward the door. Then he stopped. Without turning around, he said, You said you need me. Yes, Emily said. Why me specifically? She was quiet for a moment. Because when things go wrong in a way I haven't planned for, I need the person beside me to be someone who has been in those moments before. Someone who knows what it feels like when the air changes and the situation flips and everything you built falls apart. She paused. I can plan for 1,000 contingencies, but I can't plan for what I don't know. And you've been in situations I haven't been in. That matters. Maddox stood in the doorway. She had said something that almost nobody ever said to Ryan Maddox. She had said, You have something I don't have and I need it. He walked out without responding, but he didn't put his objections in writing that day. The team had 2 days to prepare. Those 2 days told Emily more than the 11 months before them. She had always been good at reading people, not in any mystical sense, but in the way that comes from paying close attention, for long enough that patterns become visible. Every person has a way of moving through the world that reveals something about them, and soldiers in particular are people whose patterns are legible if you know what to look for. Brick prepped his equipment 3 times. Each time he reassembled it faster. He was burning nervous energy through repetition, which meant he was anxious, which meant he cared more than his casual exterior suggested. Good. Ruiz spent the prep time reading the briefing materials Emily had distributed. Not the summary pages, the full documents including the appendices. He didn't ask questions, but she noticed him making small notes in a personal notebook he kept in his left breast pocket. He was building his own mental map of the mission. Good. Pierce ran inventory on the medical kit, twice reorganized it in a way that would make specific supplies faster to access in the field, and then spent an hour in quiet conversation with another team member Emily couldn't hear. She was anticipating casualties, not because she was pessimistic, because she was a medic and that was the job. And Maddox was the most interesting to watch. He spent the first day doing what she expected, drilling with the team, running equipment checks, studying the maps she had provided. All correct, all professional. But on the evening of the first day, she found him in an empty room, sitting with the photographs from the briefing laid out in front of him. The photographs of the compound, the guard positions, the entry points. He was memorizing them. Not reviewing them, memorizing them. There was a difference, and Emily could see it in the way his eyes moved slowly, methodically from one element to the next, committing each one to the kind of deep storage that only activates when someone has decided something matters. He looked up when she entered. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Maddox said, "The Eastern Guard Post, the one that creates the 4-minute window." "Yes." "The rotation interval, has it been consistent?" "Over 14 observed cycles, yes. Average deviation of 27 seconds. 27 seconds is a lot if we're already in the open. That's why the approach timing is built around the early edge of the window. We enter at the start of the 4 minutes, not the middle." He nodded slowly. "What if one of them doubles back early? Then the secondary route is already pre-staged, and we move to it the moment there's contact." Maddox looked at her. Something in his expression had shifted from what it was in the briefing room, less combative. Not warm exactly, but present in a different way. "You're not going to make mistakes in the planning," he said. It wasn't a compliment. It was more like a reluctant conclusion he had arrived at through his own analysis. "I'll make some," Emily said. "I always do. The kind that get people killed." She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, I hope not. I've tried to build this so that no single mistake becomes catastrophic. But I've never taken a plan into the field and had it come back the same way it went in." He looked at her. "Neither has anybody," he said. It was the closest thing to a shared truth they had found in 11 months. Emily nodded. She turned to leave. Maddox said, "Carter." She stopped. "If I'm in the field and I see something you don't see," he said, "you'll listen. I'll listen to anyone who has better information than I do," she said. "That's not courtesy. That's strategy." She walked out. Behind her, Maddox gathered the photographs back into a stack and slid them into his pocket. He had a mission to memorize. The night before deployment, Emily didn't sleep. This wasn't unusual for her. Before any major operation, her mind ran at a level of activity that sleep couldn't reach. Not anxiety exactly, but a kind of sustained alertness. A continuous low-level process that kept reviewing, recalculating, finding new angles on problems she'd already solved a dozen times. She sat with her back against the wall in her quarters, the mission file open across her legs, going through it for what was probably the 30th time. Every soldier in her team had a face. Every face had a set of capabilities, a set of vulnerabilities, a set of tendencies under pressure that she had spent months cataloging. When the mission degraded, and it would degrade some part of it, because they always did, she needed to know what each person would do before they knew themselves. Brick would push through fear with aggression. She needed to channel that, not suppress it. Ruiz would go internal, pull back into his own head. She needed to keep him engaged, keep him talking. Pierce would be fine until someone was hurt badly enough to threaten her assessment of her own competence. Then she would need a moment. Emily needed to give her that moment without losing the timeline. And Maddox was the one she had spent the most time thinking about. Not because that she was afraid of him. She wasn't, but because he was the most capable person in the unit, and the most capable person in any unit was always either the greatest asset or the greatest liability, depending on which direction they pointed their capability. Right now, Maddox's capability was pointed at skepticism, at her, and she couldn't change that through an argument or a conversation or a display of authority. The only thing that would move him was the mission itself. She had known this from the beginning. She had built the plan partly in the hope that the quality of the intelligence would be enough that he would read the secondary access route and recognize that she had information nobody else had, that he would see the contingency layers and understand that she had thought about failure more carefully than he had probably given her credit for. And she thought it had worked. A little. Not enough to make him comfortable. Not enough to make him trust her. But enough to make him memorize the photographs. Which was, she had decided, the best she could ask for before the bullets started flying. She closed the file at 2 in the morning. She sat in the dark for a few minutes. And then she thought about the 12 Americans somewhere in that compound in the dark, not knowing if anyone was coming. She thought about that for a while. Then she lay down, closed her eyes, and told herself to rest even if she couldn't sleep. Tomorrow was going to be the hardest day of her career, and she was going to need everything she had. They departed at dusk. The team moved through the staging area in the particular quiet of soldiers who have left everything behind except the mission. The jokes had stopped. The opinions had stopped. The carefully maintained postures of casual confidence had been set aside in favor of something more efficient and more honest, the focused, contained alertness of people who understood that the next several hours would require everything they had. Emily was the last one on the transport. As she moved past Maddox, he said quietly enough that only she could hear, "The plan is solid." She looked at him. "I know," she said. He almost smiled, almost. They flew in silence. And somewhere below them, 12 Americans were counting the hours, counting the minutes, counting the seconds, waiting for the sound that would tell them someone had come. Emily Carter sat in the dark of the transport, eyes open, running the contingencies one more time. All of them. Even the ones she hoped she'd never need. Because the plan was solid, and plans were where missions began. What happened next was something else entirely. The transport touched down 40 minutes before the operational window opened. 40 minutes sounds like a long time until you are crouched in hostile territory with 12 lives depending on a 4-minute gap in an enemy rotation schedule, and a team that is still deciding whether to trust the person holding the map. Emily felt the shift the moment her boots hit the ground. Not in the air, not in the terrain, in the team. There is a specific kind of tension that moves through a group of soldiers right before an operation begins, and she had learned to read it the way a doctor reads a pulse, not just whether it's there, but what it's telling you. Most of the team was channeling their tension correctly, pressing it down into focus, into precision, into the controlled readiness that good training produces. Ruiz was already scanning. Pierce was checking her kit one final time with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done it so many times the motion is nearly unconscious. Even Brick, for all his nervous energy, had gone still in the particular way that young soldiers go still when the reality of a situation finally outweighs their performance of confidence. But Maddox was carrying something else. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. The way he moved slightly separate from the group, as if maintaining a physical distance that reflected something internal. He was professional. She would never accuse him of anything less than that. But professionalism has different textures, and his right now had an edge to it that she recognized. He was waiting for her to fail, not hoping for it. She didn't think he was that kind of man. But he was waiting in the way that a person waits when they are certain something is coming, and they have already half prepared themselves for the moment when they will need to take over. It was the waiting of a man who believed deep in his bones that the plan was about to break down, and that when it did, the real leadership would need to step forward. Emily filed that away and kept moving. "Primary team on me," she said quietly. "We're going to the staging position. No talking from here." They moved. The approach to the compound took 18 minutes. Emily had planned for 22. The team was faster than she had built into the timeline, which was good. Faster meant more buffer inside the operational window. She made the adjustment in her head, automatically recalculating the hold position and the entry timing, and said nothing because there was nothing that needed saying. At the 12-minute mark, Maddox came up beside her. He moved silently for a big man. That had always impressed her, even when she would never have said so. He leaned close to her ear. Contact left, 30 meters. She had already seen it. Single sentry, she murmured back. Not on the rotation schedule. He's a floater. A pause. You knew about floaters. I accounted for up to 2. We're still inside the primary plan. He pulled back. She heard him exhale, not in relief but in the particular way of someone reassessing a calculation. They reached the staging position at 19 minutes, 4 minutes ahead of the window. Emily held up a closed fist in the team, stopped moving, dropped low, went quiet. They waited. 4 minutes is a long time when you are not moving. The mind fills the silence with everything it has been trying not to think about. Emily had learned over years of operational support work that the waiting was where most mistakes were born, not in the moment of action, but in the moment just before it, when a person had too much time to second guess and not enough information to resolve the doubt. She kept her eyes on the eastern perimeter, counting. At 2 minutes and 40 seconds into the hold, she heard bricks shift behind her. A small movement, barely audible, but enough. She turned her head a fraction, met his eyes, held up one finger. He went still. At 3 minutes and 50 seconds, the Eastern Guard began his rotation away from the perimeter. Emily watched him move. 20 seconds, 30. The rotation interval ran exactly 23 seconds early tonight, within the 27-second average deviation she had briefed. Exactly within parameters. She touched Ruiz on the shoulder. They moved. The entry through the secondary access point, the collapsed utility route that nobody else had known about 3 days ago, took 4 minutes and 11 seconds. The back section had deteriorated more than the structural survey suggested, which put them into the 8% margin Emily had discussed with Maddox, and for approximately 90 seconds, the passage was tight enough that she could feel the compressed weight of the structure around her and understood with complete clarity what it would mean if it shifted. It didn't shift. They came through into the interior of the compound and regrouped in a utility corridor that smelled like old concrete and something chemical that Emily identified as industrial cleaning fluid, the kind used in storage facilities. Exactly the kind of facility the compound was supposed to be. She exhaled. First checkpoint, she whispered. Everyone count off. They counted off. 7 voices, all present. Maddox was last. His voice was steady. But as Emily turned to orient the team toward the next waypoint, she caught a look on his face that she filed away without comment. It was not quite respect, not yet, but it was something in the vicinity of it. The look of a man who has placed a bet based on his best available analysis and has just discovered that the odds might be different from what he calculated. She turned away before he could catch her seeing it. 60 meters north, she whispered. Stay tight. They moved. The interior of the compound was not quiet the way Emily had hoped. This was the first deviation from the plan that mattered. The intelligence reports had indicated minimal interior activity after 2,100 hours. What they found instead was a compound that was operating as if it were the middle of the afternoon. Voices behind doors, movement in corridors that should have been empty, a level of activity that suggested either the enemy had changed their operational schedule or the intelligence source had been working from outdated information. Emily processed this in the 3 seconds it took her to stop the team at a corridor junction. Hold, she breathed. Nobody moved. She listened. The voices were behind a door to the left, at least 4 individuals speaking in a language her intelligence background gave her enough of to work with. They were not talking about the compound. They were arguing about something personal, something domestic, with the irritated energy of men who had been cooped up too long. Not alert, not searching, just present, she recalculated. The direct route to the hostage location ran past that door. The alternative was a longer path through a section she had mapped as secondary corridor an extra 3 minutes, but it avoided the door entirely. 3 minutes in a 30-minute operation was significant, but a confrontation in a narrow interior corridor with 4 unknown personnel at an unknown armament level was more significant. She tapped Ruiz on the arm. Use 3 fingers to point right, then walk 2 fingers in the air to indicate the longer path. He nodded once, passed it back. The team adjusted. Maddox came up beside her again as they moved into the alternative corridor. Change, he murmured. Secondary route segment, she breathed back. 3-minute addition. We're still inside the window. How much inside? 8 minutes. She felt him absorb that. 8 minutes of buffer. Enough if nothing else changed. Not enough if 2 more things changed. They both knew it without saying it. Keep moving, she said. They kept moving. At the 40-meter mark, something happened that Emily had not built any contingency for. The lights in the corridor went out. Not a gradual dimming, not a flicker. A complete, instantaneous, total loss of light that turned the corridor into something so dark that Emily lost her sense of direction in the first second and spent the next two orienting herself by putting one hand on the wall and one on the person in front of her. Behind her, she heard a sharp intake of breath. She thought it was Brick. She was right. Don't move, she said, barely audible. Stay exactly where you are. Nobody moved. Her mind ran fast. Power failure or deliberate cutoff. If deliberate, it meant detection, and if they had been detected, she would expect to hear something within 30 seconds. Alert running feet shouted commands. If she heard nothing in 30 seconds, probability shifted toward power failure. She counted. 15 seconds. 20. 25. Silence. Power failure. She exhaled. Red lights, she murmured. Low and covered. Stay close. The team switched to dim, red-filtered illumination. Enough to navigate, not enough to bleed light under doorways. They moved slower now, more careful, but they moved. And then Maddox stopped moving. Emily felt the column halt behind her and turn back. Maddox was crouched at a door they had passed. His hand was flat against it. He was listening to something on the other side. She came back to him, put her ear close to the door, heard it. A voice, low, ragged, exhausted, speaking English. American English. She and Maddox looked at each other in the red-tinged dark. The intelligence had placed the hostages 60 meters further along the corridor. They were here. For a moment, neither of them moved. The reality of it, 12 people on the other side of that door, alive within arm's reach, pressed against the operational logic that said, you do not improvise. You do not deviate from the plan without running the implications. You do not make emotional decisions in hostile territory. Emily made the decision in 4 seconds. She ran the implications in those 4 seconds. Different door, different position, likely means fewer guards on this location, because it wasn't the designated holding point, which means less resistance on entry and exit. Power failure has disrupted routine. Windows of opportunity open and close. This one was open. She touched Maddox on the shoulder, held up 2 fingers, pointed at the door, pointed at herself and at him, held up 4 fingers to the rest of the team, pointed back down the corridor, pointed down, stay, watch, hold. Maddox looked at her for 1 full second. In that second, she saw him make his own calculation, saw him run his own analysis, saw him arrive at the same conclusion. He nodded. They went in. What happened in the next 40 seconds was not something Emily had planned because she hadn't known this room existed. But training doesn't disappear when plans do. She moved through the doorway with Maddox behind her, cleared the immediate space, found 2 guards in positions of low alertness. One seated, one standing near a far wall, both reacting to the intrusion with the half-second lag of men who had not expected anyone to come through that door. The half-second was enough. No shots fired, no sounds that would carry, and then they were past it, and Emily was moving toward the cluster of 12 people pressed against the far wall. Americans, all of them looking at her with the particular expression of people who have stopped believing in rescue and are not yet sure if what they are seeing is real. A woman in the front, older, gray-haired, wearing what had been a field jacket and was now mostly dirt, looked at Emily and said, "Are you actually here?" "Yes," Emily said. "Can everyone move? 2 people need help. One has a broken ankle. One is she's not well. Fever. She can walk, but she'll need support." Emily turned to Maddox. He was already assessing. "I've got the ankle," he said, no hesitation. "Pierce," Emily said into the radio, one click the prearranged signal for medical need. The door opened and Pierce came through. Pierce first took one look at the woman with the fever, made 3 quick decisions that Emily could see play out across her face, and moved to the woman's side. "I'm your medic," Pierce said quietly. "My name is Yolanda. I'm going to stay with you the whole way." "Okay." The woman looked at her and started crying silently. Pierce didn't tell her to stop. She just put her hand on the woman's arm and held it there. Ruiz and Brick were in the doorway covering the corridor. Emily did a rapid count. 12 hostages, 7 operators, 19 people who needed to move through a hostile compound with a broken operational timeline, a power failure of unknown duration and cause, and an unknown number of enemy personnel who were either oblivious or already alerted. She had 8 minutes of buffer left in the original timeline. She had just used approximately 4 of them. We move now, she said. Same formation, hostages in the center, Maddox and Ruiz on the outside. Bricky, you have the rear. Pierce stays with the fever patient. I'm on point. You're on point, Maddox said. Yes. Carter. Maddox, she looked at him. You have the man with the broken ankle. You can't be on point and carry weight. I don't have weight. I'm on point. A beat. Fine, he said. They moved. The corridor outside was still dark, still quiet. But quiet had changed its meaning since the power failure. It no longer meant empty. It meant unknown, and unknown was the most dangerous state of all in a hostile compound with 19 people trying not to make a sound. Emily moved fast and low. The modified route back to the access point was different from the approach she had planned, two separate paths for exactly this reason. Entry and exit on different lines so that any compromise of one didn't automatically compromise the other. The exit route was longer by 2 minutes, but wider in critical sections, which mattered now that they were moving 12 additional people with varying physical states. At the first quarter junction, she stopped. Listened. Footsteps moving toward them. Fast. She pressed back and raised a fist. 19 people stopped moving. The footsteps came closer. And then they turned, took a different quarter, and receded. Emily counted to 5. Moved again. Behind her, she heard one of the hostages whisper something to another hostage, not loud, barely a breath, but enough. She didn't turn around. She didn't have to. She heard Ruiz's quiet voice, firm and patient, settle the conversation in 4 words. Silent. All the way. Silence. They reached the access point at 7 minutes past her revised timeline. 7 minutes over. She had expected 4. The difference was the hostage mobility. The broken ankle slowed the group more than she had calculated, even with Maddox bearing most of the weight. She ran the math. The extraction helicopter had a window of 30 minutes on station. They were already at minute 26 of that window. 4 minutes. She looked at the access point, the narrow utility passage that had taken 4 minutes and 11 seconds on the way in, with a team of 7 moving fast. 19 people, 2 with physical limitations. 4 minutes. She heard Maddox do the same math behind her. Carter, he said quietly. I know, she said. We can't make that window with this group at this pace. I know. So what's the plan? She was already thinking, already running it. Every contingency she had built, every backup she had pre-staged, every option she had stored against the possibility that the primary extraction would fail. None of them were designed for this exact configuration. But one of them was close enough. She turned to the team. Change of plan, she said. Listen carefully. We're not going back through the access point. The silence that followed was the particular silence of people who have been following a plan and have just been told the plan is gone. Brick said, what, a new exit? I have a secondary extraction point that I pre-staged before the mission. She looked at each face in turn. It's 400 meters west of our current position. The helicopter can redirect there. It's a larger LZ. It can accommodate the full group. Pre-staged, Maddox repeated. His voice was careful. You pre-staged a secondary extraction point. Yes. Before the mission. Before the mission. A beat. And you didn't brief it. I briefed everything necessary for the primary plan. The secondary point was contingency information that I held back to avoid overloading the briefing. Something moved across Maddox's face. It was complicated. She could see him working through multiple reactions at once, the professional recognition that pre-staging a contingency extraction was exactly the right kind of operational thinking, and the personal friction of learning that she had planned for his plan failing before his plan had even started. 400 meters, he said, yes. Through a compound that is currently in an unknown security state with a power failure of unknown origin and 19 people, including 2 casualties. Yes, another beat. How long? 12 minutes if we move well. The helicopter redirects in 3. That leaves us a 9-minute window on arrival. Yes. Maddox looked at her, really looked at her, in a way he had not looked at her in 11 months of working in the same unit. Then he turned to the hostage group and said in a quiet and completely certain voice, we're changing routes. You are going to stay close, stay silent, and trust the people around you. We are going to get you out of here. Do you understand? 12 exhausted, frightened, relieved, disbelieving faces nodded. Emily caught the gray-haired woman's eye. The woman gave her a look that said, "I don't know who you are, but I believe you." Emily turned west. "Move," she said. They moved. The next 12 minutes were the longest of Emily Carter's professional life. Not because of what happened, because of what kept almost happening. 3 times the group had to stop and press into cover because of movement ahead. Each time Emily made the call, wait or route around, and each time the call turned out to be right, but the margin was close enough that her mouth went dry and stayed that way. At the 8-minute mark, they passed through a section of the compound that Emily's map had marked as storage, but which turned out to be occupied 2 individuals sitting in the dark because of the power failure, barely visible, not looking toward the corridor that 19 people were quietly moving through. Emily did not breathe for approximately 30 seconds. Nobody made a sound. They came through clean. At the 10-minute mark, Brick, who was covering the rear, came up fast to Emily's position. "Contact behind us," he breathed. 2, maybe 3. They found the room. Emily processed this. They had found the empty holding room, which meant the clock had just changed. "How far?" she asked. 2 minutes, maybe less. She looked ahead. 200 meters to the LZ. 12 minutes elapsed. The helicopter was on station. "We run," she said. "The casualties. Maddox carries. Pierce supports. Everyone else runs." She raised her voice to the minimum level that would carry. "We are moving fast now. Stay together. Don't stop." And then they ran. 19 people through a hostile compound in the dark, running toward a point on a map that Emily Carter had pre-staged alone 3 days ago, against the possibility that every other part of her plan would fail. Maddox ran with a grown man across his shoulders and did not slow down. Pierce ran with her arm round a feverish woman and did not let go. The gray-haired woman ran like she was 20 years younger than she looked. Emily ran at the front and kept counting the distance and kept pushing and kept her eyes moving and kept making the 100 small decisions that running at the front of a group through hostile territory demands. And then they were through. Open air, stars overhead, the LZ ahead. And the sound, the specific, unmistakable sound of rotor blades beating the air coming in from the west. Brick behind her said something she couldn't hear over the noise, but she saw his face, and she knew. Behind them, pursuit. 200 meters, a helicopter that had 45 seconds before it touched down, and a team that had been moving hard for 19 minutes. She turned to Maddox. He was already looking at her. She said, "Can you hold the rear?" He set the man with the broken ankle down gently, carefully, without drama, and looked at Emily with the same expression he'd had in the corridor when she'd said she was going on point. "Go," he said. She ran. She got everyone moving toward the helicopter. Organized the boarding, counted bodies as they loaded 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, kept counting 8, 9, 10. The helicopter turbines were screaming. The pilot was already pulling pitch. They had seconds 11. She turned. Maddox and Ruiz were backing toward the helicopter, creating distance between the pursuing personnel and the aircraft, buying 30 seconds through sheer presence and training. "Now," she screamed over the noise. They broke and ran. They hit the helicopter at a dead sprint. The aircraft was already lifting. Maddox grabbed the frame and hauled himself in. Ruiz was right behind him. Emily pulled the door. They were up. She sat on the floor of the helicopter between a woman with a fever and a man with a broken ankle in a team that was breathing so hard she could feel the collective exhale like a physical thing. She closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Then she opened them and started counting again. 12 hostages, 7 operators, 19, all of them, every single one. Maddox was across from her, his back against the hull, his eyes on her. Not the waiting eyes from before the mission, not the skeptical eyes from the briefing room, not the dismissive eyes from 11 months of working beside someone he had already decided he understood. Different eyes. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she looked away because there were 12 Americans who needed medical assessment, in a team that needed a situation report, and a pilot who needed coordinates, and none of those things were going to happen by themselves. She got to work, because the mission wasn't over until everyone was safe. And Emily Carter had learned a long time ago that the last 10% of any operation was where the careless ones let their guard down. She was not careless. She had never been careless. That was the thing they had never understood about her. Not weakness, not softness, just a different kind of discipline, the discipline of the person who plans for everything, carries the weight quietly, and refuses to let go until the last person is home. The helicopter climbed into the dark. Below them, the compound receded. Behind them, 12 Americans, who had stopped believing in rescue, were beginning slowly, carefully to believe again. And somewhere in the noise, in the wind, in the cold air at altitude, Ryan Maddox was looking at the ceiling of a military helicopter and thinking about everything he thought he knew about strength, and realizing for the first time that he had been measuring the wrong things. The helicopter landed at the forward operating base at 2:47 in the morning. The moment the skids touched down, the base came alive in the way bases come alive when something has gone both terribly wrong and miraculously right at the same time. Medical teams were already moving toward the aircraft before the rotors finished spinning. Lights cut across the landing pad. Someone was shouting coordinates into a radio. Someone else was counting bodies through the window before the door even opened. Emily was the last one off. That was intentional. She had counted everyone onto the helicopter, and she counted everyone off it, and she would not stop counting until all 19 people were on solid ground and accounted for and in the hands of people equipped to take care of them. That was not protocol. Nobody had told her to do it that way. It was simply who she was, the person who stayed until the last detail was handled, the person who closed the loop on every open item before she allowed herself to exhale. She stepped off the helicopter, and her boots hit the tarmac, and she stood still for exactly 4 seconds. 4 seconds of nothing. No calculating, no planning, no reading the room, just the feeling of ground beneath her feet and the sound of 12 American voices she had never heard before tonight being reunited with the sound of safety. Then she picked up her kit and started moving. The debrief was supposed to happen at 0600. 4 hours away, Emily had 4 hours to file her preliminary mission report, conduct a team medical check, secure the intelligence materials she had collected during the operation, and sleep for whatever fraction of those 4 hours remained after everything else was done. She slept for none of them. This was not a choice. Her mind would not go quiet. It kept running the mission, not in the anxious, second-guessing way of someone looking for their mistakes, but in the precise, methodical way of someone doing post-operation analysis in real time, cataloging every deviation from the plan, every decision point, every moment where a different call might have produced a different outcome. She was still running it when Ruiz knocked on her door at 0515. "Carter, come in." He opened the door and looked at her sitting at the field desk. Mission documents spread across it, coffee going cold at her elbow, and did not look surprised. "You haven't slept," he said. "No, the debrief is in 45 minutes. "I know." He came in, sat down in the chair across from her without being invited, and looked at the documents on the desk. "How bad is the deviation report?" "Not bad," she said, "considering. 7 major deviations from primary plan. 6. The power failure and the route change are 1 event, not 2. He almost smiled. 6 then. A pause. "You know what I kept thinking out there?" She looked up. "What?" "Every time something went wrong, I looked at you, and you already knew." He paused. "Not because you're psychic, because you had already thought about it before we left. I could see it the way you moved to the contingency without hesitating, without the half-second of recalibration that the rest of us needed." He leaned forward. "That's not intel work, Carter. That's command." Emily looked at him for a moment. "Don't say that to Maddox," she said. "Maddox already knows," Ruiz said quietly. "He just hasn't figured out what to do with it yet." He stood up, straightened his jacket. 0600, he said. "I'll be there." He walked out. Emily looked back at her documents and then set them aside because there was something Ruiz had said that was sitting in her chest in a way she needed to leave alone for a few minutes. Command. She had never wanted command, not in the traditional sense. She had wanted to be useful. She had wanted to be in the room where the real decisions happen, not because she needed the authority, but because she understood with a clarity that had shaped her entire career, that decisions made without the best available information were dangerous. And she almost always had the best available information, and she almost never got to be in the room. Until now. And it had been exactly what she expected, and nothing like what she expected. She had prepared obsessively and still been surprised 6 times. She had planned for failure and still felt the cold shock of it when it arrived. She had been certain about her contingencies and still felt the weight of 19 lives in her chest when she told them the primary plan was gone. She had been, in other words, exactly as human as everyone else, just better prepared. She picked up a Soifi. It was cold. She drank it anyway. 0600 came fast. The debrief room had 12 people in it, including Colonel Hargrove, who had the particular expression of a senior officer who has received news that is simultaneously very good and very complicated. The 12 American aid workers were already in medical care. All 12 were going to be fine. That was the good news. The complicated news was everything that had happened between the transport landing and the helicopter lifting off, and Hargrove wanted all of it on record. Emily gave it to him. She walked through the debrief the same way she had walked through the briefing methodically from memory without performance. Every deviation documented, every decision explained, every contingency that had activated and why and what the outcome had been. She was 40 minutes into it when Hargrove held up a hand. The secondary extraction point, he said, walk me back through that. Emily walked him back through it. You pre-staged this before the mission. Yes, sir. Without briefing it to the team. I briefed it to you, sir. It's in the pre-mission documentation I submitted. Hargrove looked at something on the desk in front of him, then looked at her. Page 47, he said. Page 47, she confirmed. Contingency extraction, cites subsection C. A silence. Then Hargrove said, how many people read to page 47? Nobody in the room said anything. Emily did not smile, but she noted the absence of an answer and filed it exactly where it belonged. The pre-staging of the secondary site, she said, added approximately 4 hours to my preparation time and required a ground-level confirmation visit that I conducted alone 3 days before the mission. It was not in the primary briefing because I assessed the probability of primary extraction failure at under 30%, and I didn't want to introduce complexity into the briefing that might create decision paralysis if the primary was running smoothly. She paused. I was wrong about the 30%. We ended up needing it. You were wrong about the 30%, Hargrove repeated. Yes, sir. And your contingency was in place anyway. Yes, sir, because I planned for what I'm wrong about. Another silence. Then Hargrove turned to the rest of the room and said, that is what operational planning looks like, gentlemen. Nobody said anything, but Emily heard from the far end of the table the sound of Maddox shifting in his chair. She didn't look at him. The debrief continued. It was another hour before it ended, and when it did, Hargrove kept Emily and Maddox behind. The rest of the room filed out, and suddenly there were 3 people in a space built for 12, and the air felt different. Hargrove looked at Maddox. Your assessment, he said. Maddox was quiet for a moment. Emily watched him from her peripheral vision, not turning to face him, giving him the space to say whatever he was going to say without the pressure of her eyes on him. The plan was the right plan, Maddox said finally. Every decision in the field was the right decision. I would have made different calls on 2 points, and I believe in retrospect that both of my calls would have been worse. He paused. Carter ran a clean operation in conditions that were not clean. I don't have anything to add to that. Hargrove nodded. And the command structure, Maddox was quiet for longer this time. The command structure was correct, he said. Emily kept her eyes on the wall in front of her. Good, Hargrove said. He stood up. Carter, I want a full written debrief by 1800. Take the morning. He walked to the door, stopped. And Carter, the aid workers want to speak with you. The woman. The gray-haired one. She's been asking for you since they landed. He walked out. The room was quiet. Emily started gathering her documents. Maddox said Carter. She kept gathering. Emily. She stopped. It was the first time he had used her first name. In 11 months and dozens of briefings and operations in shared spaces, he had called her Carter. The way he called everyone by their last name with the casual authority of a man who had never thought about it differently. Emily. She turned. I was still sitting at the table. His hands were flat on the surface. He looked like a man who had decided to say something difficult and was committed to saying it but had not yet quite found the shape of it. What I said before the mission, he said, in front of the team. She waited. That was wrong, he said. Not strategically wrong, personally wrong. I said it to damage your authority before the operation started, and that was... He stopped, exhaled. That was the wrong thing to do. Emily looked at him. In the silence that followed, she thought about 11 months of small moments, the comments in the hallway, the looks across the briefing room, the way he had dropped her folder in the trash can, with the specific deliberateness of a man making a point. She thought about the weight of it, the accumulated friction of working alongside someone who had decided what you were before they looked at you. She thought about what she wanted to say. And then she thought about what actually needed to be said. Why did you believe it? She asked. He looked at her. Why did you believe I couldn't do the job? She said. Not what you told yourself, not the official answer, the actual reason. He was quiet for a long time. Because you didn't look like what I thought a leader looked like, he said. And I had been in enough situations where the wrong person in command got people hurt that I made a decision about you before I had evidence. He paused. I made a decision based on how you looked, not on what you'd done. Emily held his gaze. And what have I done, she said. Brought 12 people home, he said. In a situation where the plan broke down 6 different times and you had already thought about all 6 of them. A pause. I misjudged you, he said, badly, and I did it publicly. And I'm sorry. Emily nodded. It was not a small moment, and she did not treat it like one. She let it sit for a second, gave it the weight it deserved. Because an apology like that, a real one from a man like Maddox, in the language of a soldier who did not apologize easily, was not nothing. I need you to understand something, she said. This wasn't about proving you wrong. I wasn't out there last night trying to show you up. I know that, he said. I was out there because 12 people needed to come home and I was the person with the best plan to get them there. She paused. That's all it ever was. I know, he said again, and something in his voice had changed. Not broken. Maddox was not a man who broke, but recalibrated, reset to something more honest. I know that now. Emily picked up her documents. We're going to need to figure out how to work together going forward, she said. Not because command says so, because the unit is better when we're both pointed in the same direction. He looked at her. Yes, he said, it is. It is. She walked toward the door. Carter. She stopped again, without turning this time. The secondary extraction point, he said, the one on page 47 that nobody read. A pause. How long did it take you to realize nobody was going to read to page 47? She almost smiled. About 4 minutes into writing page 1, she said. She walked out. The medical facility was quieter than she expected. The aid workers had been assessed, treated, and were now in a recovery space that smelled like antiseptic and institutional coffee, and the specific kind of exhausted relief that comes when a body finally believes it is safe. Some of them were sleeping, some were in conversation with the base medical staff, some were just sitting holding cups they weren't drinking from, staring at nothing in particular. The gray-haired woman was awake. She was sitting in a chair by a window wrapped in a blanket that someone had brought her, and she looked up when Emily came in with the specific alertness of someone who had been waiting. Captain Carter, she said. Just Emily is fine, Emily said. The woman studied her. Up close, she looked younger than she had in the compound and older than she had on the helicopter. Somewhere in between, settling into whatever she actually was. I'm Dr. Margaret O.C., she said. I was leading the medical team on the aid operation. Emily sat down in the chair across from her. How are you feeling, Dr. O.C.? Like I've been held in a converted storage facility for 9 days, she said. Which I have. A pause. You're younger than I expected. People say that. Does it bother you? Less than it used to. Dr. O.C. looked at her for a long moment. I want to tell you something, she said. And I want you to actually hear it, not just accept it politely and move on. Emily looked at her. All right. When they brought us into that compound, the first thing I did was assess our survival probability. I'm not a doctor. I assess things. I looked at the location, the security, the resources available to us, the political situation, the timeline, and the probability that anyone would come before our situation deteriorated past the point of no return. She paused. I gave us a 40% chance. Emily said nothing. Then on the 6th day, one of the guards said something. I speak enough of the language to understand him. He said that no one was coming, that the people who sent us didn't care enough about people like us to spend political capital on a rescue. She paused. I adjusted my estimate to 20%. What happened on day 7? Emily asked. Day 7 I stopped estimating, Dr. Ose said, because the estimation was making it harder to do the things I needed to do to keep my people alive. So I just stopped. A long pause. And then you came through that door. Emily held her gaze. I need you to understand, Dr. Ose said, that in that moment what I felt was not relief, not yet. Relief came later on the helicopter. In that moment what I felt was recognition. She paused. I looked at you and I thought, here is someone who has been thinking about this room, this problem, these 12 people for much longer than I have been thinking about being rescued. Emily's throat tightened slightly. She kept her face still. You were right, she said. 6 weeks. Dr. Osei nodded. 6 weeks. She leaned forward. Do you know how many people in that compound had been thinking about us for 6 weeks? Just me, Emily said. Just you, Dr. Osei confirmed. So I want to say something clearly, and I want you to not deflect it or minimize it or turn it into something about the team, because what I'm about to say is about you specifically. Emily waited. You saved 12 lives, Dr. Osei said, not by being the strongest or the loudest or the most decorated. By caring enough and being disciplined enough and being smart enough to spend 6 weeks on a problem that other people had already moved on from. She paused. That is an extraordinary thing, and you should know that it is. Emily sat with that for a moment, a full moment, not dismissing it, not deflecting it, letting it land exactly where it was aimed. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, Dr. Osei said. You don't owe me gratitude for telling you the truth. A small silence settled between them, comfortable in the way that silences between two people who have both been through something difficult can sometimes be. Then Dr. Osei said, the big man, the one who carried David out. Maddox, Emily said, is he always like that? Emily considered the question. He's learning to be different, she said. Dr. Osei looked at her with the particular expression of a woman who has spent decades reading people. That was diplomatic, she said. I'm working on it, Emily said. Dr. Osei made a sound that was almost a laugh, the first one Emily suspected that she had made in 9 days. Emily stood. You should rest, Dr. Osei. Margaret, she said. After last night, I think we're on a first-name basis. Emily smiled. Margaret, rest. You'll be transported home in 48 hours. Someone will come to brief you and your team on what to expect. Emily, Margaret said as Emily turned to leave. She stopped. What happens to you now? Margaret asked. After something like this, what comes next for you? Emily thought about it honestly. I go back to work, she said. There's always another problem that needs thinking about. Margaret looked at her for a long moment. I hope, she said slowly, that the people you work with understand what they have in you. Emily thought about Maddox sitting at the debrief table with his hands flat on the surface, choosing his words carefully. She thought about Ruiz knocking on her door at 5:15 in the morning to tell her what he'd seen. She thought about Pierce on the helicopter holding a feverish woman's arm and not letting go. She thought about the folder she had picked up out of the trash can. Some of them are starting to, she said. She walked out. The base was fully active now. The morning rhythm of a military installation moving at its normal pace as if the night before had been ordinary, which in the particular economy of these places it almost was. Missions went out, missions came back, and the base absorbed both without breaking stride. Emily moved through it with the particular invisibility she had always had in places like this. The invisibility of someone who was not loud enough to draw attention, not decorated enough to command it automatically, not large enough to occupy space in the way that certain people occupied space. She was thinking about what Margaret had said. 6 weeks on a problem other people had moved on from. She had never thought about it that way. She had thought about it as doing her job, as applying the particular skills she had to the particular problem in front of her. She had not thought about it as extraordinary, because it had not felt extraordinary, it had felt necessary. Like breathing, like the only possible response to knowing that 12 people were somewhere in hostile territory, and that the information being used to plan their rescue was incomplete. She couldn't have stopped thinking about it, even if she had tried. That was the thing that nobody seemed to understand about her. It wasn't discipline that kept her at the desk until 2 in the morning, cross-referencing structural surveys and drainage maps and communication intercepts. It was the simple, straightforward impossibility of doing anything else when she knew that the work wasn't done. She was walking past the motor pool when she heard her name. Carter? She turned. Brick was sitting on the hood of a vehicle which was technically against regulations, a fact that did not appear to concern him. He looked like a man who had slept for exactly the amount of time his body required and woken up with questions. Brick, she said. I've been thinking, he said. About what? About the secondary extraction point. He paused. The one you pre-staged before the mission. Yes. You knew we were going to need it. I thought there was a meaningful probability we'd need it. But you didn't tell us about it. I told you I had 3 contingency routes, she said. I told you the primary plan was built to account for failure. I told you to bring the ability to make good decisions when information changes. She paused. I gave you everything you needed to trust the process. I just didn't give you every detail of the process. Brick thought about this. She had realized during the 2 prep days considerably more thoughtful than his exterior suggested. The loudness was a layer, not the substance. Was that the right call, he asked, not telling us about page 47. Emily considered this honestly. Probably not entirely, she said. If the primary extraction had failed and we hadn't made it to the secondary point, you would have died not knowing the option existed. That's a legitimate criticism. She paused. But I was also managing cognitive load during a high-pressure briefing and adding a second extraction site to the mental map of a team. Already processing a complex primary plan creates a specific kind of divided attention that has its own risks. Brick looked at her. So it was a judgment call. Everything is a judgment call, she said. The best you can do is make the call with the most information available and accept that you'll be wrong about some percentage of them. He nodded slowly. Then when things went sideways in there, the power failure, the wrong room, the timing, I looked at you every single time. I know, she said, and every single time you already had the next move. Not always immediately, she said honestly. There were 4 seconds after the power failure where I was running analysis. Those 4 seconds probably felt like 12 to everyone else. They felt like 30, Brick said, but you still had the answer at the end of them. Emily looked at him. I want to ask you something, she said. Go ahead. Before the mission, what did you think of my being in command? He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. I thought, he stopped. Started again. Maddox had a lot of opinions that I hadn't formed my own views on yet. And Maddox is someone I trust and respect, so I deferred to his opinion of me. Yeah, he paused. That was wrong. Why hadn't? He blinked. Because you hadn't done anything to deserve his opinion. And because, she prompted, he thought about it. Because opinions about someone's capability should come from watching their capability, not from watching someone else's reaction to them. Emily nodded. That's a lesson worth keeping, she said. It took Maddox 14 years to get there. You just got there last night. She turned to walk away. Carter, he called after her. She stopped. For what it's worth, he said, I'm glad you were in front. She kept walking, but this time she was almost smiling. The written debrief took her 4 hours to complete and was 43 pages long. She submitted at 17:58, 2 minutes before the deadline, with a 3-page appendix covering recommended modifications to standard extraction planning protocol based on the specific failure modes the mission had encountered. She had not been asked for the appendix. She wrote it anyway. Because somewhere in that 47-page document, the one nobody had read past page 6, there was information that might keep the next team safer. And that information was not going to organize itself. It was 2100 hours when Maddox found her in the common room. He sat down across from her without preamble, which was his way, and set a coffee cup in front of her, which was not. She looked at the cup. You look like you hadn't had coffee in a while, he said. And you'd been staring at that debrief for 4 hours. She picked up the cup. It was hot. You were watching me work. I was across the room, he said. You were visible. She drank the coffee. It was better than she expected. She said so. I've been doing this for 14 years, he said. I know how to make coffee. A pause settled between them, not uncomfortable, which was itself different from every pause they had shared before tonight. The appendix, he said. She looked up. I read the debrief, he said, including the appendix. She held her expression steady. The recommended modification to the contingency briefing protocol, he said. The one about staged disclosure of extraction alternatives to manage cognitive load while maintaining redundancy. Yes, that's the lesson you pulled from last night. It's one of them. He was quiet for a moment. You're already fixing the thing you did imperfectly, he said. It wasn't quite a question. That's the job, she said. He looked at her for a long moment. A long, quiet, searching look, the kind that happens when someone is recalibrating. Not just their opinion of a person, but their entire framework for forming opinions. What would you have done, he said, if the secondary extraction point hadn't worked, if you'd gotten there and the LZ was compromised? Emily looked at him. Page 51, she said. He stared at her. You wrote a page 51, he said. I wrote a page 51, she confirmed. He exhaled through his nose. It was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of a man confronting the complete and irrefutable evidence of his own error in judgment. Carter, he said. Emily, she corrected, because he had used it once and she had decided she preferred it. He looked at her. Emily, he said. It sat differently in his voice now than it had in the debrief room. Less like a man making a concession and more like a man actually saying her name for the first time. I was wrong about you, he said, not just in the ways I already told you, all the way down. She looked at him steadily. I know. How did you keep working, he said, knowing what I thought of you? She considered this. Because what you thought of me wasn't the mission, she said. The mission was 12 people in a compound. Your opinion of my ability to lead was a problem to manage, not a problem to solve. I managed it by being impossible to ignore. He was quiet for a moment. That's cold, he said. That's efficient, she said. He almost laughed. The closest thing she had seen to it from him, a small shift at the edge of his expression that lasted about a second before discipline reasserted itself. Then his face settled into something serious again. Going forward, he said, I want to work with you, not around you, not in spite of you, with you. Emily looked at him. I'd like that, she said. I don't know how to do that yet, he admitted. It's going to take some adjustment. I know, she said. I'm not in a hurry. He picked up his own coffee. Page 51, he said more to himself than to her. I always write a page 51, she said. He shook his head slowly. What's on page 52? That one's classified, she said. This time he did laugh, just briefly, just enough. And in the particular quiet of a military common room, at 9 in the evening, two soldiers who had been pointed at each other for 11 months sat across a table and drank coffee and said almost nothing. And the almost nothing was more honest than everything that had come before it. Somewhere in the medical facility across the base, 12 Americans were sleeping safely. Somewhere in a file on a secure server, a 43-page debrief and 3-page appendix were already being read by people who would use them to write better protocols. And somewhere inside Ryan Maddox, something that had been pointed in the wrong direction for a very long time was quietly, slowly beginning to turn. 3 days after the extraction, the story leaked. Not the classified details, not the routes or the contingency plans or anything that would compromise future operations. But the broad shape of it, 12 Americans rescued a rescue team that shouldn't have made it out, a mission that broke down 6 different ways and came home anyway. That shape made it out of the secure channels and into the kind of conversations that travel fast in military communities. And the name attached to it was Emily Carter. She found out the way she found out most things, not through official channels, not through someone telling her directly, but through the small behavioral shifts of people around her. The way the base administrative staff made slightly more eye contact than before. The way soldiers she didn't know nodded when she passed. The way her name appeared in a forwarded email chain that someone had accidentally included her on the chain itself, 3 days old, and already involving people at 2 levels above her pay grade. She deleted the email and went back to work. But the story kept moving. By day 4, Colonel Hargrove called her in. He was standing when she arrived, which was unusual. Hargrove was a man who conducted most of his business seated behind the desk that served as both his workspace and his signal of authority. Standing meant the conversation was different in kind from the ones he usually had. Sit down, Carter, he said. She sat. He remained standing for a moment longer, looking at something on the wall, a map, standard issue annotated in his own handwriting in 3 different colors. Then he turned. Division wants to talk to you, he said. Emily kept her expression neutral. About the debrief, about your future assignment. He paused. They've read the 43 pages, both of them above Colonel. I see. They've also read the appendix, and they would like you to come to division headquarters and explain at page 47. A pause. And page 51. Emily looked at him. Who told them about page 51? I did, Hargrove said, because page 51 is the kind of thinking that needs to be institutionalized, not filed away. He sat down now. Carter, I want to tell you something that I should have said before the mission, and I didn't say because I was managing competing pressures that I let become more important than being direct with you. She waited. You were the right choice, he said, not the safe choice, not the politically convenient choice. The right choice. I knew it when I made it, and I didn't tell you clearly enough because he stopped, looked at the desk. I was managing Maddox's objections through back channels instead of addressing them directly, and that created an environment before the mission where you had to spend energy defending your authority that should have been spent on the mission itself. Emily processed this. How much of what Maddox said in the hallway before the briefing was something you knew about? She asked. Hargrove held her gaze. Enough, he said. Not the specific words, but enough to know what the atmosphere was and not address it the way I should have. A silence. I appreciate you telling me that, she said. I'm telling you because the people at Division are going to ask you about leadership under hostile conditions, he said. And I want you to go into that conversation knowing that the hostile conditions included your own base. And I want you to know that that was my failure, not yours. Emily sat with that for a moment. Then she said, with respect, sir, it wasn't entirely your failure. It was Maddox's, and it was the team's, and some percentage of it was mine for not addressing it more directly myself. She paused. I chose to let the mission spool up for me instead of having the conversations before it started. That was a strategic choice, but it was also a choice that put the team at a disadvantage going into a high-pressure operation. Hargrove looked at her. You're defending my officers, he said, after what they put you through. I'm being accurate, she said. Defense and accuracy aren't always the same thing. He shook his head slowly. Division, he said. Thursday, I'll have orders cut. She stood. Is there anything specific they want me to prepare? Bring page 47, he said, and page 51. A pause. And whatever comes after page 51. Emily looked at him. Page 52 is classified, she said. He almost smiled. Maddox told me you said that. She walked out. In the hallway, she stood still for exactly 3 seconds. Division headquarters, senior officers, a conversation about her future assignment. She had spent 11 months being the person nobody trusted with the important decisions. She was not entirely sure what to do with the information that this might be changing. She picked up her pace and went back to work. Because whatever Thursday brought, there was still today to get through, and today had its own problems. The problem today was that Maddox had requested a joint training review, and Emily had said yes without thinking carefully about what that would mean in practice, which was the two of them in a training room with 4 junior operators walking through decision-making frameworks for high-pressure field situations. She arrived to find Maddox already there. He had set up the room differently from how training rooms were usually arranged. Not the standard rows of seats facing a front position, but a circular configuration. Everyone facing each other, no clear head of the table. She noticed it immediately and said nothing. He noticed her noticing. Old setup was hierarchical, he said by way of explanation. The point of this session is that everyone's input matters. Emily looked at the circular arrangement. You changed the furniture for a training session. I changed the furniture because the old setup sent the wrong message. He paused. That's something I learned recently. She sat down. The 4 junior operators filed in 2 she recognized from previous intel briefings, 2 she had barely interacted with. They ranged in age from 22 to 29, and they carried the particular alertness of people who had been told they were attending a training session run jointly by Carter and Maddox, and had spent their morning trying to figure out what that meant. What it meant, it turned out, was the most unusual training session any of them had ever attended. Maddox opened. 3 nights ago, he said, this unit ran an extraction operation that went wrong 6 different ways and came home with everyone alive. I was part of that operation. So was Captain Carter. We're going to walk you through it, not the classified tactical details, but the decision-making. We're going to tell you what we each saw, what we each thought, and where we each got it wrong. He paused. I'm starting with where I got it wrong. The room went very quiet. Emily watched the 4 junior operators recalibrate. In real time, watched their body language shift from polite professional attention to something more engaged, more alert. Because Maddox admitting he got something wrong was apparently not something that happened often enough to be ordinary. Maddox walked them through his objections before the mission. Not in the vague self-protective language of someone managing their image, but with the specific honest detail of someone doing an after-action review on their own failures. He told them what he had thought of Emily's command authority. He told them the exact reasoning he had used to arrive at that opinion. He told them, and this was the part that made the room go still in a different way, that the reasoning had been wrong, not because it was illogical, but because it was built on the wrong premise. I was measuring leadership by combat record and physical presence, he said. Those things matter. I'm not saying they don't, but they're not the whole picture. And when you build your assessment of someone entirely on the parts of the picture, you can see you're missing what you can't see. And in intelligence work, in planning work, in the kind of work Captain Carter does, what you can't see is often the most important part. He looked at Emily. She took over. She walked them through the planning process, the 6 weeks of preparation, the source verification, the structural surveys, the contingency building. She was honest about what she had gotten wrong, the 30% failure probability she had assigned to the primary extraction, which had been too low. The decision not to brief the secondary extraction point, which had been defensible but imperfect. The guard rotation timing, which had deviated within her predicted parameters, but had still required real-time adjustment. Then she said something that the 4 junior operators would remember individually for a long time. I want to tell you the thing that actually kept everyone alive that night, she said. And it wasn't the contingency plans. The plans mattered, but they're not the answer. She paused. What kept everyone alive was that every single person on that team made good decisions inside a plan that was breaking down around them. Sergeant Ruiz read the corridor situation without being told. Sergeant Pierce assessed a medical situation in 30 seconds and made the right call. Sergeant Maddox carried a man with a broken ankle through an active compound without slowing the group. She paused. I could plan for the building. I could not plan for the people. The people planned for themselves, and they were excellent. Brick, one of the 4 juniors, shifted in his seat. You're including Maddox in that? Yes, Emily said, even though she said what happened before the mission was real and it mattered. What happened during the mission was also real and it also mattered. People are not one thing. Brick nodded slowly. Maddox said, in the field, Captain Carter made 12 decisions I would not have made. I've gone back through all 12. I believe 9 of them were better than what I would have done. The other 3 I'm still not sure about, and I've told her that directly. Emily looked at him. The other 3 are the ones I'm rewriting into the protocol appendix, she said, because not sure is worth examining. One of the operators she didn't know well, a young woman named Specialist Tran, who had said nothing until this point, raised her hand. Yes, Emily said. How did you? She stopped, started again. I've read the public debrief summary, the part about the secondary extraction point. How did you know to pre-stage it? How did you know you'd need it? Emily thought about how to answer this honestly. I didn't know, she said. I knew there was a meaningful probability that I'd need it. I knew because I had run through the failure modes of the primary plan and found enough of them that a secondary pre-stage was worth the extra 4 hours of preparation. She paused. But the real answer to your question is I pre-staged it because I was more afraid of being wrong without a backup than I was of being right without needing one. Specialist Tran looked at her. You were afraid. Of course I was afraid, Emily said. I was responsible for 19 lives. Fear is appropriate in that situation. The question is what you do with it. She paused. I turned mine into preparation. Other people turn theirs into paralysis. Some people turn it into aggression. She didn't look at Maddox when she said the last part, but she didn't need to. None of those are wrong exactly, but some are more useful than others. The training session ran 2 hours and 40 minutes. By the end of it, the circular seating arrangement felt less like a deliberate choice and more like the only natural configuration for what the conversation had become. 4 junior operators and 2 senior ones talking about failure and adaptation and the specific kind of courage it takes to plan for being wrong. When it ended, Maddox stayed behind again. This was becoming a pattern, the 2 of them in a room after everyone else had left, having the conversations that couldn't happen in front of an audience. Emily was beginning to think that this was how Maddox processed things publicly through the official channels of his professional behavior, and then in the secondary room in the honest language he kept for smaller audiences. She was starting to understand him better. Specialist Tran, he said. Emily looked up from gathering her materials. What about her? She's been in the unit for 4 months. She's the only woman currently assigned to the intelligence support function. He paused. She's good, better than good, but she hasn't been getting the cases that match her level. Emily was still for a moment. You're telling me this because I've been part of the culture that determines which cases go to which analyst, he said. And I've been making those calls the same way I made the call about you, and I think I've probably been wrong about her the same way I was wrong about you. He paused. And I'm not sure I know how to fix it without it looking like I'm overcompensating. Emily looked at him. This was not a conversation she had expected to be having. This was several steps further than an apology. This was a man examining not just his behavior toward one person, but the pattern underneath it, the structural thing that had produced the behavior, and asking for help addressing it. She thought about how to respond. You can't fix the culture alone, she said, and trying to overcorrect individually usually makes it worse because it draws attention to the correction instead of normalizing the standard. She paused. What you can do is change the inputs. Change what you look at when you're making assignment decisions. Capability metrics, not impression metrics. How do I tell the difference between them? The same way I built my mission assessments, she said. Document everything. When you make a call about someone's capability, write down what it's based on. If you can't write it down in observable behavioral terms, things you actually saw, results you actually measured, then you're working from impression. And impression is where bias lives. Maddox was quiet for a moment. That's a significant change to how I've been operating. Yes, she said, it is. Worth it? She looked at him. You tell me. You've just spent 3 days recalibrating everything you thought you knew about a person based on watching what she actually did. Is that worth it? He held her gaze. Yeah, he said, it is. She nodded. Then do the same thing for everyone else. He exhaled. That's a lot of recalibrating. It is, she agreed, but you've already done the hardest part. What's the hardest part? Deciding to look differently, she said. Most people never get there. He picked up his materials and stood. Thursday, he said. It wasn't a question. Somehow he knew about the division meeting, which meant Hargrove had told him, which meant Hargrove wanted him to know. Thursday, she confirmed. You should go, he said, not the dismissive usage of the phrase. The other one, the kind that means this is an opportunity and you should take it. I'm planning to, she said. He walked to the door, then stopped, which was also becoming a pattern. I've been thinking about what you said, he said, in the debrief, about fear. She waited. That you were afraid, he said, the whole time. Yes. You didn't show it. I know. He turned to look at her. How Emily thought about this seriously. It deserved a serious answer. Because showing it wouldn't have helped anyone, she said. My fear was information. It was telling me the situation was dangerous and high stakes and that I needed to be extremely careful. I used that information. I just didn't broadcast it. She paused. Fear is a tool. Like any tool, the question is whether you're using it or it's using you. Maddox looked at her for a long moment. I've been in combat for 14 years, he said, and nobody has ever said that to me. Someone should have, she said. He walked out. Emily stood alone in the circular training room and looked at the chairs arranged in a shape that had no head, no hierarchy, no implied position of authority. She thought about Thursday. She thought about division headquarters and senior officers and conversations about future assignments and what any of it actually meant in the context of a career that had been built in the margins, in the appendices. Nobody read in the pre-staged contingency sites. Nobody knew about in the 6 weeks of obsessive preparation that had happened before anyone asked her to be in the room. She was not sure she was ready for the center of the room. She was not sure anyone was ever ready for that. But she had spent enough time in the margins to know that the center was not where the real work happened. The real work happened before anyone was looking. The real work happened in the planning, in the preparation, in the quiet, disciplined accumulation of knowledge that nobody celebrated and everybody depended on. The center was just where the work became visible. She had been doing the work all along. Thursday came faster than she expected. Division headquarters was a different world from Fort Bragg, larger, more formal, with the specific institutional gravity of a place where decisions got made that affected a lot of people who would never meet the people making them. Emily arrived 20 minutes early, which was her standard, found the waiting area, and sat with her file on her lap and her coffee going cold and her mind running the meeting the same way she ran every operation. What they would ask, what she would say, what the actual decision on the table was underneath the questions. She had thought about this for 3 days. The actual decision she believed in was not whether she was capable of command. That question had been answered on the night of the extraction. The actual decision was what kind of command, whether divisions saw her primarily as a planning asset to be deployed on specific high-value missions, or as a developing operational leader who could build and run a team over time. Those were very different futures. She had a preference. She had not told anyone what it was. The meeting was conducted by two colonels and a brigadier general whose name Emily had known from reading reports for 3 years without ever having been in the same room as him. General Allison was 70 small, had the economy of movement of someone who had long ago identified the exact minimum physical expression required for any given purpose, and had stopped doing anything beyond it. She reminded Emily in a sideways way of herself. They asked her about the mission. She answered. They asked her about the appendix. She walked them through it. They asked her about page 51, and she explained it, and she watched General Allison's expression do something small and precise that Emily interpreted as satisfaction. Then General Allison said something Emily had not anticipated. "Captain Carter," she said, "I want to ask you about Sergeant First Class Maddox." Emily held her expression steady. "Yes, General." "In your debrief, you documented his objections to your command authority in neutral factual terms. You described his in-field performance in unambiguously positive terms. You did not editorialize on either." She paused. "I want to know what you actually think, not what you documented." Emily looked at her. "Before the mission," she said carefully, "Sergeant Maddox's objections were professionally damaging and personally unjust. During the mission, he was the most capable operator I have ever worked alongside in a field environment. After the mission, he has conducted himself with a degree of self-examination and accountability that I did not expect and that I believe reflects significant character." She paused. "I think he is someone who had a deeply wrong belief about what leadership looks like and who has the integrity to revise that belief when the evidence required it. Those people are rarer than they should be." General Allison looked at her for a long moment. "You're defending him," one of the colonels said. "I'm being accurate," Emily said, "which is what I said to Colonel Hargrove when he made the same observation." A small silence. General Allison said, "What would you do with him if you had command authority over future mission planning and you could structure the team as you chose?" Emily had not anticipated this question either. But she had an answer because she had been thinking about it since the training session 3 days ago, without quite acknowledging to herself that she was thinking about it. "I would want him as my senior field operator," she said. "Not because I've forgiven whatever happened before the mission. Forgiveness isn't the relevant metric. Because he is exceptionally capable in the environments where I am least capable, and because he has demonstrated in the past 72 hours a willingness to examine and revise his own assumptions that is genuinely rare." She paused. "A planning function without strong field execution is incomplete, and a field operation without rigorous intelligence planning is dangerous. Those two things belong together, and they work best when the people doing them trust each other." "Do you trust him?" General Allison asked. Emily thought about it honestly. "I'm starting to," she said. "We're building it." General Allison made a small sound, not quite approval, not quite satisfaction, but something in the vicinity of both. She made a note on something in front of her that Emily couldn't see. Then she said, "We're going to offer you a new position, Captain Carter. I want you to hear the full terms before you respond." Emily straightened slightly. "Yes, General." "There is a unit being restructured at the operational planning level. The restructure is in response to 2 mission failures in the past 18 months that post-analysis attributed to insufficient integration between intelligence planning and field execution. The failures cost lives." She paused. "We want someone who can build the bridge between those two functions. Someone who can plan at the level your debrief demonstrates and who has demonstrated the ability to operate and command in the field when the plan breaks down." Another pause. "That is not a common combination." "No," Emily agreed, "it is not. The position carries a promotion to major." The room was very quiet. Emily sat with this, major. A command position, not a support role, not an attached specialist, not the intelligence person in the room who wrote reports that other people sometimes read. A position that was structurally and formally recognized as leadership. She had not let herself want this. She had told herself for a long time that what she wanted was to be useful, to be in the room, to have her work matter. She had told herself that official recognition was secondary to actual impact. She realized now, partly lying to herself. Not because she was ambitious in the calculating sense, but because there is a difference between doing the work and having the work acknowledged, and the difference matters in ways that are harder to dismiss than she had allowed herself to admit. She said, "Can I ask one question before I respond?" "Yes," General Allison said. "The unit being restructured," Emily said. "Is there flexibility in how I build the team?" General Allison looked at her. "Within parameters." "Then yes," Emily said. "I accept." She paused. "And I'd like to recommend Sergeant First Class Maddox as my senior field operator," she said. "If he's willing." General Allison made another note. "We'll ask him," she said. The meeting ended 37 minutes later. Emily walked out of division headquarters into the flat afternoon light and stood on the steps for a moment. Major Emily Carter. She said it to herself once quietly, not as performance but as orientation, the way you say a new address out loud when you're first learning to think of it as home. Then she took out her phone and sent a message to Ruiz. It said, "They offered me Major." His response came back in 45 seconds. Obviously, it said, "I've been waiting for Thursday." She almost laughed. She put the phone away and walked to her car and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. She thought about the folder in the trash can. She thought about the 6 weeks at a desk with bad coffee and satellite imagery. She thought about a quarter that went dark without warning and 4 seconds of dead silence while she ran the analysis. She thought about 19 people running through a compound toward a point on a map that only one person knew about. She thought about 2 cups of coffee in a common room at 9 o'clock at night, and the closest thing to a laugh she had ever heard from Ryan Maddox. She started the engine. She had a team to build. And somewhere on the other side of a phone call, that division was about to make a man with 14 years of combat experience and a significantly revised understanding of what leadership looked like was about to get an offer he hadn't seen coming. She was fairly certain he would say yes, not because she had planned for it, but because she had learned over the course of one very long mission and 3 very long days that Ryan Maddox said yes to things when the evidence was clear. And the evidence this time was very clear. She drove back to base. She had work to do. Maddox got the call on a Friday morning. "I was in the middle of a weapons maintenance check, which was the kind of task that demanded enough attention to keep the hands busy and left the mind just free enough to wander." He had been letting his mind wander more than usual lately, into territory that felt unfamiliar, into questions he had not previously considered worth asking. His phone buzzed. "Division number?" He set down what he was holding and answered. The call lasted 11 minutes. He said very little. He listened in the way he listened to pre-mission briefings, completely without interruption, storing everything. When the call ended, he sat still for a moment with the phone in his hand and the quiet of the maintenance bay around him. Then he called Emily. She picked up on the second ring. "You knew," he said, not an accusation, more like the confirmation of something he had already suspected. "I recommended you," she said. "The decision was theirs. You recommended me to build your team. I recommended you as senior field operator because you are the best field operator I have ever worked with," she said. "Those are not the same thing." A pause. "There's a difference," he said. "Building the team is my job," she said. "Running the field operation is yours. I'm not putting you under me, Maddox. I'm putting us beside each other." Another pause, which is where we should have been 11 months ago. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the maintenance bay, he could hear the ordinary sounds of the base vehicle's voices, the distant rhythm of a unit going about its day. The sounds he had lived inside for 14 years, familiar as breathing. "They're promoting you to major," he said. "Yes. You're 28 years old." 29, she said. "My birthday was last week." He blinked. "I didn't know that." "There was no reason for you to know that," she said. "We weren't the kind of people who knew each other's birthdays." "Are we now?" A small pause. "I think we're becoming the kind of people who could be," she said, "if we keep doing what we've been doing." He exhaled. "What have we been doing?" "Telling each other the truth," she said. "That's rarer than it sounds." He looked at the phone in his hand, at the division number still on the screen, at the decision sitting in front of him that he realized already made, probably at some point during the conversation, probably before the call had even ended, probably in the quiet of the maintenance bay in the first few seconds after he had set the phone down. "All right," he said. "All right," she said back. "When do we start?" "Monday," she said. "I'll send you the preliminary team structure tonight. Read it before then. Carter." "Emily," so she corrected. Again, "Emily." He said it like he was still practicing, like it was a word in a language he was learning to speak. "Is there a page 52? She was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "There's always a page 52, she said. He hung up and sat in the maintenance bay for another 3 minutes alone, with the decision and the quiet and the specific weight of a life that was about to change direction. Then he picked up what he had set down and went back to work, because there was still today to get through, and today he had learned recently was worth doing well. The preliminary team structure arrived in his inbox at 9:47 that evening. It was 31 pages long, including 2 appendices. He read all 31 pages, both appendices. He made notes in the margin of a legal pad he kept on his desk for exactly this purpose. And by the time he finished, it was past midnight and his notes filled 4 pages. He sent her a message. "Read it. Question about page 19. Her response came back in under a minute, which meant she was still awake, which did not surprise him. "What's the question?" "The intelligence assessment rotation. You've got a 48-hour cycle. Should be 72 minimum for the kind of deep analysis you're describing." A pause, longer than her usual. Then, "You're right, I'll revise it." He looked at the message for a moment. He had been right about something in an Emily Carter planning document. He filed that carefully, not as a victory, but as evidence that this was going to be the kind of partnership where both directions mattered, where the information flowed both ways, where being right was not about who had the authority, but about who had the better information. He sent one more message. "Page 23, the field rotation schedule. I can make it tighter." "Show me Monday," she wrote back. "Night," he sent. "Night," she said. He put his phone face down on the desk and looked at the ceiling. 29 years old, Major Emily Carter, a woman who had spent 11 months being the person nobody trusted and who had spent the 3 weeks since the extraction systematically rebuilding every structure around her into something that actually worked. He thought about the folder in the trash can. He had not allowed himself to think about it much since the apology. But lying in the quiet of his quarters with the team structure document on his desk and 4 pages of notes in his handwriting, he thought about it now. The specific deliberateness of it, picking up the folder, holding it over the trash can, letting it fall, and the specific image of Emily Carter reaching in and pulling it back out without a word. He had been trying, he realized, to make her feel small. And she had looked at the trash can in the folder in the room full of people watching to see what she would do. And she had simply decided that the folder was more important than his opinion of her and had picked it up and put it back on the table and returned to work. He had called that weakness at the time. He understood now that it was the opposite. Because the weak response, the human response, the one he would have understood, was to react. To meet his deliberateness with her own. To make the moment about him instead of about the 12 people who needed to come home. She had not done that. She had looked past him to the mission. That was not weakness. That was discipline of a kind he had not previously recognized, because it didn't look like what he thought discipline looked like. It didn't look like physical toughness or combat efficiency or the hard-edged confidence of a person who had been tested in firefights. It looked like a woman picking a folder up out of a trash can and going back to work. He had been measuring the wrong things for a very long time. He closed his eyes. Monday was coming. He needed to be ready for it. Monday arrived with the particular clarity of a day that has been anticipated long enough to feel inevitable. Emily was at the new unit's planning space at 0600, which was an hour before anyone was expected, because she wanted to be in the room before the room filled up. She wanted to feel the space before it became what it was going to become. The planning space was larger than what she'd had at Fort Bragg. More resources, better equipment, a dedicated intelligence analysis station that she had already connected to the secure feed she needed, a conference table that was, she noted with satisfaction, already circular. She had specified that in the setup request, some lessons you apply immediately. Maddox arrived at 0650. He looked at the circular table. He looked at her. He didn't say anything, but something in his expression said that he had noted it and filed it in the correct place. He set his legal pad on the table, 4 pages of notes she could see from where she stood, and poured himself coffee from the machine in the corner. Page 23, he said. Show me, she said. He showed her. The field rotation schedule she had built assumed a standard recovery interval between operational deployments. What Maddox showed her using the legal pad and 11 years of institutional knowledge that had never been written into any document she had access to was that the standard interval was based on outdated physiological research from the 90s, and that operators performing at the level she was planning for needed a different model entirely. She listened. She asked 3 questions. She revised the schedule. He watched her revise it in real time, taking his notes and integrating them with her framework in a way that took approximately 8 minutes and produced something better than either of them had built separately. That's the process, she said, looking at the revision. What process? What we just did, she said. That's what this unit is supposed to look like. He looked at the revised schedule, then at her. 8 minutes. Because we both came in with the right information, she said. You had the physiological data. I had the operational framework. Neither one works without the other. He was quiet for a moment. You designed this unit around that principle, he said. It was not quite a question. I designed it around the lesson from the extraction, she said, which is that good information and good execution belong together, and when they're separated, people die. She paused. We're not going to let them be separated. The rest of the team arrived over the next 40 minutes. Ruiz came in at 0710 and looked at the circular table and nodded once in the way of a man who recognizes a deliberate choice and approves of it without needing to say so. Pierce came in at 0720 and immediately located the medical supply cabinet and spent 3 minutes assessing its contents with the focused efficiency of a person who will not be comfortable in a new space until she knows where the things she needs are kept. Brick came in at 0730 with coffee in one hand and his assessment already running. She could see it in the way his eyes moved around the room, cataloging it, reading the circular table in the intelligence station and the layout of the space against whatever model of how things worked he had arrived with. Specialist Tran came in last at 0740, and she was the one Emily had been watching for. Because Specialist Tran had been assigned to this unit at Emily's specific request, and Specialist Tran did not know that yet, and the moment when she found out was going to be informative. Emily had not told Maddox either. He found out when Tran walked in, registered the composition of the room, registered her own presence in it, and said in a voice she was working to keep neutral, I wasn't told this was a permanent assignment. It is, Emily said, effective today. Tran looked at her, then at the room, then back at her. I'm an intelligence specialist. Yes, Emily said, that's why you're here. A pause. I don't have field experience. I know it, but I never been by them. Emily said, that's something we'll address over time, right? Now I need your analysis capability. That's what this unit is built around, the integration of intelligence analysis with field execution. You're the analysis function. Maddox is the field execution function. Everyone else lives in the space between. Tran stood very still for a moment. Then she said, why me? Emily looked at her steadily. Because you're the best analyst in the support function pool and you've been getting cases that don't match your level. I'm giving you cases that do. Another pause. How do you know what my level is? Tran asked. I read everything, Emily said. Every report, every assessment, every piece of work that came out of the intelligence support function in the past 18 months. I read it because I was looking for the people who were thinking the right way before anyone asked them to. She paused. You were thinking the right way. Tran's composure held. But something behind it shifted, a small controlled shift that Emily recognized because she had felt the same thing years ago. The first time someone had looked past the surface of her work and seen what it actually was. Thank you, Tran said. Don't thank me, Emily said. Do the work. The work will speak for itself. She paused. It always does. Maddox was watching this exchange from across the room. When Emily caught his eye, he gave her nothing. No expression, no signal, no acknowledgement. But the nothing was different from the nothing he had given her for 11 months. This nothing was attentive, present, paying the kind of attention that precedes understanding. The first team meeting ran 2 hours and 20 minutes. It was the most productive 2 hours and 20 minutes Emily could remember since the 6 weeks before the extraction, And the reason it was productive was the same reason the extraction had worked. Everyone in the room was pointed in the same direction, and the direction was forward. Maddox opened the field doctrine discussion by saying something that made the room go quiet. "I'm going to tell you the biggest mistake I made in the last major operation I ran," he said. "And I'm going to tell you why it almost got people killed. And then I'm going to tell you the correction. Because this unit is built on the assumption that knowing how you got it wrong is as important as knowing how you got it right." Pierce looked up from her notes. Ruiz put down his coffee. Brick leaned forward. Tran's pen stopped moving. Maddox talked for 12 minutes about the extraction, about his objections to Emily's command, about the specific moments where his assumptions had created gaps in his own operational thinking, about the 48 hours before the mission where he had spent energy managing his resistance to the command structure instead of using that energy to prepare. He was precise, he was honest, he did not minimize anything. When he finished, the room was the particular quiet of people who have been given something real and are treating it accordingly. Then he said, "Carter, your turn." Emily had not known he was going to do this. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she talked for 10 minutes about what she had gotten wrong, the 30% probability estimate, the page 47 decision, the 3 calls in the field that Maddox had flagged and that she still wasn't certain about the moments where her planning had held and the moments where it had held only because the people around her had filled the gaps with their own capability. When she finished, Tran said, "You're both telling us where you failed." "Yes," Emily said. "Why?" "Because this team is going to go into situations where things break down," Emily said. "And when things break down, the most dangerous thing is a culture where admitting a mistake feels worse than hiding it. We're building the opposite culture from the start." She paused. "If you make a mistake in this unit, you tell me, immediately. We fix it together. And nobody uses it against you. Ever." Tran looked at Maddox. "Including you." Maddox looked back at her. "Especially me," he said. "I have the most to unlearn." Tran wrote something in her notebook. Emily did not ask what it was, but she was fairly certain she knew. 6 weeks into the new unit, the call came that Emily had been expecting and hoping would not come yet. Another mission. Different territory, different political context, but the same essential shape. American personnel in a situation that required extraction under pressure. The new unit's first operational deployment. She had 6 days to plan. She used all 6. On the 5th day, Maddox came into the planning space at 11 at night and found her exactly where she always was, at the intelligence station documents spread in the careful, organized pattern that was uniquely hers, coffee cold at her elbow. He pulled up a chair. "Walk me through it," he said. She walked him through it. It took an hour and 40 minutes. He interrupted 17 times with questions, each one specific, each one drawing on the kind of operational knowledge that could not be written into any document because it lived in the body of a man who had been in the field for 14 years. She answered 15 of the 17 questions immediately. For the other 2, she said, "I don't know yet. I'm still working on it." And he said, "For both, I have a thought." And both thoughts were good. She incorporated them. At 1 in the morning, Maddox looked at the plan in its current form and said, "This is better than the extraction plan." "It should be," she said. "I've learned more since then." "From what?" She looked at him. "From watching how good field execution actually works," she said. "From having someone in the room who asks the right questions." He was quiet for a moment. "The team is different from what I expected," he said. "Different how?" "Better. The integration. The way Tran and Ruiz work together, the way Pierce has adapted her medical planning to the operational timeline instead of treating it as a separate track." He paused. "That happened fast." "It happened because I designed the structure to make it easy," Emily said. "Talent does the rest. You designed for it." "I designed for everything," she said. "You know that." He almost smiled. The full version this time, not the controlled almost expression from before, but something that reached his eyes. "Page 52, he said. She looked at him. "Is that what's on page 52? He said. "The team structure, the integration model, Tran on analysis, Ruiz as the bridge Pierce, with the modified medical protocol, all of it." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "You want to know if I planned the team before I knew I'd have the team," he said. "Yes," she said simply. He stared at her. You wrote the team structure before division offered you the position, he said. I wrote it 3 days after the extraction, she said, when I was doing the post-operation analysis and I could see what the unit should have looked like and didn't. She paused. I didn't know I'd get to build it. I built it anyway, because the work needed doing. Maddox sat with this. Outside the base was quiet in the way of 2 in the morning, the specific quiet of a place that never fully sleeps but breathes differently when the operational rhythm slows. Inside the planning space, the intelligence station hummed and the documents lay in their careful pattern, and 2 people who had spent 11 months being pointed at each other sat beside each other at a circular table and talked about a mission that was 6 days away. I owe you something, Maddox said. She looked at him. Not an apology, he said. I already gave you that, something different. He paused. I've been thinking about what you said, about the culture, about the way I've been making decisions for 14 years, and how much of it was built on the wrong foundation. Another pause. I've been going back through cases, people I worked with, calls I made about capability and assignment, and I've found he stopped, started again. There are people I underestimated, not just you, people who weren't given the right opportunities because I was operating from an impression instead of evidence. Emily listened. I can't fix all of it, he said. Some of it is years old, but some of it is recent enough that something can still be done. He looked at her. I want to address it, but I don't know the right way to do that without making it worse. Write it down, she said. The same thing you told me in the training session. Document what you actually observed, what the capability was, what the assignment should have been. Then take it to the relevant command and let the documentation do the work. That exposes my own mistakes. Yes, she said. It does. He held her gaze. Worth it, she asked. The same question he had asked her, the same word, swas. Yes, he said, without hesitation this time. She nodded. They sat in silence for a moment that was not uncomfortable. Then Maddox said, the mission. Day after tomorrow, I want to run a full team dry run of the primary extraction route. Already scheduled, she said, 0800. He nodded. And the contingency way, 0800 on day 5. Which contingency? She looked at him. All of them. He exhaled. How many pages is this plan? 61, she said, with 3 appendices. I've read to page 48, he said. 13 more pages, she said. Tonight. Or tomorrow morning. 0700 would give you an hour before the team arrives. He picked up the plan from the table. Tonight, he said, I want to know what's on page 61 before I sleep. He stood, tucked the document under his arm. Carter, he said. She looked up. Emily, he corrected himself. And this time it came out naturally, not practiced, not deliberate, just the right word in the right place. The way language sounds when it has finally settled into its correct form. Maddox, she said. We're going to run this mission clean, he said. We're going to run it better than clean, she said. We're going to run it the way it should have always been run. He walked out. Emily sat alone in the planning space for a few minutes after he left. She thought about where she had been 11 months ago. The hallway at Fort Bragg. Going into the trash can. The room full of soldiers who had already decided what she was before she had said a word. She thought about picking the folder up. She thought about these 6 weeks at the desk that no one had known about. The 3 days before the mission alone, confirming a secondary extraction site that no one knew existed. The 4 seconds of darkness after the lights went out. The moment she pushed through a door she hadn't planned to push through and found 12 people who had stopped believing anyone was coming. She thought about the gray-haired woman asking, "Are you actually here?" She was here. She had always been here, just not in the room where anyone was looking. And now she was building the room herself, designing it from the floor up. Circular tables and page 52s in a team structure. She had written before she knew she'd get to fill it because the work needed doing, and Emily Carter had never been able to stop doing the work just because no one was watching. That had always been her greatest strength. That they had called it weakness for so long said nothing about her and everything about the limits of what they could see. She closed the planning documents. She looked at the intelligence station. She looked at the circular table. She looked at the room that she had built from a lesson learned in the worst and best night of her career. And she thought about the mission 6 days away and the team that would run it and the 61 pages that one man was reading right now at 2 in the morning. because he had finally genuinely decided that knowing was more important than the assumption that he already did. She stood up. She picked up her coffee, cold as always because it was always cold by the time she remembered it, and she walked to the door. She turned off the light. And in the dark of the empty planning space, the circular table sat where she had placed it, surrounded by chairs that held no hierarchy, in a room that had been built on the principle that strength comes in forms that don't always announce themselves, and that the person everyone underestimates is sometimes the only person who can see the way home. Emily Carter turned and walked down the hallway. Major Emily Carter, the soldier they had labeled the weakest link. The woman who had written the plan, pre-staged the contingency, picked the folder up out of the trash, led 19 people through a collapsing operation, and built from the wreckage of other people's assumptions something that actually worked. She had not proven them wrong by becoming something different. She had proven them wrong by being exactly who she had always been in the light, finally where everyone could see it. And that was the kind of strength that did not fade when the mission ended, did not diminish when the praise stopped, did not require an audience to remain true. It simply was. It had always simply been. And from this night forward, no one who worked beside her would ever make the mistake of calling it anything else.